Um, Today we're doing part 2 of steam systems. Before I start, just 2 things, 2 not such good news, not so bad, 2 not such good news. One is, usually there's a slideshow with the share, today there's no slideshow, so you're just stuck with my pretty face. The other thing is that usually we try to have a conclusion, and today I'm going to sort of leave you hanging with sort of like a do whatever you want to conclusion. So you'll take it for what it is, you know? Okay, let me just give
worse.
What did you say?
Which is worse? Which are the 2 of?
This one's worse. Which of those 2? That's your decision, which we think is worse. Okay, so just a minute summary of what we did last time, because this is sort of separate, and that is, last time I spoke about that when you use steam in a factory, or for that matter hot water, but we're going to focus on steam, use steam in a factory, Blios pass from the food into the steam, even though they don't touch each other. Blios pass from the steam back into the other food. We work with that assumption. We questioned it, whether that's really true, and some people are not so convinced, but we work with the assumption that pound transfers into the steam and then back from the steam. And memela, if on this side of the factory it's kosher, on this side is treif, then treif could spread to the kosher or milk to part like that. We spoke about some different solutions. We can have solutions like getting rid of the treif water, preventing the treif water from coming there. We have these halachic ways of doing this 10% rule of maybe avoiding bleeds from coming through. And the last thing we mentioned was that there's the idea of Pegimah, and that's today's, what we're going to talk about is what it means to do Pegimah and if and how that works. Okay, so we all know that if something becomes inedible, becomes Nifsal mei'achilah, then any issa that was on it falls away. Doesn't have that issa, doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It's not possible. Related to that, not exactly the same thing, but related to that is that if something is lifgam, something gives a negative taste into another food, then it doesn't affect that other food. So that means is, if I have a piece of nevela and it falls into soup, and nevela is lifgam into the soup, whatever is not our problem, somehow it's lifgam into the soup, then we just scoop out the nevela, but we don't have to worry about the tam being spread into the food because it's lifgam. It gives a negative taste, and Nosein lifgam is mutter. You don't have to worry about Nosein lifgam. Okay, so that it's related to it doesn't work. It's related to this Nifsal mei'achilah. It's not the same. Okay, so people came with this idea. They said, look, if we put something with a really bad taste into the boil of water, into this water in this whole steam system, we put something with a bad taste into it, it'll be a bad taste that will be lifgam to everything. No matter what it mixes into, it's lifgam. So if so, it's lifgam to everything, then let's say that water in the boiler is treif, the steam is treif, who cares? It's lifgam into anything it'll go into. So the ketchup that I'm cooking, this bli is lifgam into that. I don't have to worry about it. Okay, that's the idea. And in theory, basically everybody agrees to that. That yes, if you could do that, then it works. The question is, what does it take to do that? Okay, what do you have to do to make it be considered so bad that it's lifgam into every food? Okay, and to a great extent, that's going to depend on how you understand a certain Chavos Da'as. That's what we're going to talk about now, about a certain Chavos Da'as, how you understand. And Chavos Da'as is like this. Here's a question. As I just mentioned to you, there's this din that food that is not edible anymore is mutter. The Yisur will off of it. He says, okay, that's one din. He says there's another din, and that is that midaraisa, if you eat a food sheloh mei'achilah, you're not over the Yisur. So, for example, if you have a food that you have to cook in order to eat it, and you eat it raw, midaraisa, you eat it sheloh mei'achilah, you're not over the Yisur. It's also midrabanan, but it's not over the Yisur midaraisa. So he says, why do we need 2 dinim? Every food that's Nifsal mei'achilah is obviously sheloh mei'achilah. If it's not edible anymore, it's so disgusting, it's spoiled, it's automatically sheloh mei'achilah. So on the deraisa level, why does the Torah have to tell us a din that something that's Nifsal mei'achilah is mutter? Everything that's Nifsal mei'achilah is automatically sheloh mei'achilah. Not the other way around. I mean, there are things that are sheloh mei'achilah that are not Nifsal mei'achilah. Like if you eat, like if you raw food, you eat achila gasa. There's all kinds of other ways to make things sheloh mei'achilah. He says, but everything that's Nifsal mei'achilah is also sheloh mei'achilah. So who needs 2 dinim? What was the whole point of the din that says that something that's Nifsal mei'achilah is mutter? There's no. What's the point of that din? So he says, it teaches us that the fact that we have 2 dinim teaches us that there's an afkamina between Nifsal mei'achilah and sheloh mei'achilah. And that is, Nifsal mei'achilah, the food is mutter. There is no isser on that food anymore. It used to be chazer, it's not chazer anymore. There's no isser on that food at all. as opposed to shelo k'derech ha'achila, the food remains isser. But there's no isser on the person to do this act. I don't do anything wrong when I eat this food. The food is still isser. But my eating it doesn't involve any isser. Okay, so what's the difference? So there's 4 nafkaminas, I think all from him, 4 nafkaminas between those sins. What's the difference if whether the food is usher or it's not usher for me to eat it? What's the difference? 2 chumras and 2 kulas. One is like this. What happens if I take a food which is not roy la'achila? It's nifsal mei'achilah, and I put spices onto it and I put sugar onto it. I do something to make it that I could get it down. He says you haven't done anything wrong. You haven't been over this at all because the food is not usher. So the fact that you were able to swallow it makes no difference. The food became no longer usher, and therefore the fact that you did something to make it, you could get it down, doesn't make it usher. But if it's like a derech ha'achila, let's say the thing was raw, and I ate this raw food, but I spiced it up in a way that I could get it down, even though it was raw, then you were over nisr, because now it's, so to speak, not like a derech ha'achila anymore. Okay, that you got away from that, so you made it, then it would be usher. Okay, that's one. Another thing, something is only considered to be nifsal mei'achilah if what made it nifsal is not reversible. But if what made it nifsal is reversible, you can undo it, then that's not considered nifsal mei'achilah. But it's like derech ha'achila, reversible makes no difference. Like for example, he says if you make something boiling hot, burning hot that you can't swallow it, that's considered like derech ha'achila. Hagam, that if you wait 15 minutes, it's not going to be boiling hot anymore. It's going to cool down. Doesn't make a difference. Right now, it's like a derech ha'achila. That's good enough. Even though for nifsal mei'achilah, if it's reversible, that's not going to be counted. Okay, I'm not.
His Chavos Da'as kashrus was not why do we need the din of sheloh derech. That's partial.
No, why do you need nifsal mei'achilah?
Why do you need nifsal mei'achilah?
Why do you need nifsal mei'achilah?
This nafkamina wouldn't answer that question, right?
No, he's not answering. No. He said, once I told you the nafkamina, once I told you the difference between nifsal and sheloh derech, now I'm going to tell you some nafkaminas between these dinim. The nafkaminas. Okay, another. There are foods that are not edible by themselves, but they are very much edible. Like for example, this is actually a Gemara, black pepper or vinegar. Okay, you can't eat black pepper. I mean, you can't eat spoonfuls of it or vinegar. You can't eat it by itself. So it's shelo k'derech ha'achila to eat it because that's not people don't eat it like that. But it's for sure not nifsal mei'achilah because black pepper and vinegar very much are food ingredients. They use them all the time. They're not nifsal mei'achilah, but it's just shelo k'derech ha'achila. Okay, and the last is for Pesach. There isn't just an isser to eat food. There's also an isser to own chametz. So for Pesach, if it's sheloh k'derech ha'achila and you eat it, you run over the isser midiraisa. But you be over bal yirah for owning it. And, but if it only becomes, there's only no problem with bal yirah if it's actually nifsal mei'achilah. Once it's nifsal mei'achilah, then it's not chametz at all. If it's not chametz, then you're allowed to own it also. No problem. Okay. All these things I just told you, these nafkaminas, the difference between nifsal and sheloh k'derech ha'achila and these nafkaminas, seemingly everybody agrees them. Okay. But then the Chavos Da'as says something else that's puzzling. Okay, a little strange. It's hard to understand at first what he's saying. When he describes nifsal mei'achilah and sheloh k'derech ha'achila, he adds a little twist to it. Okay, he says nifsal mei'achilah means is Nisrach guf ha'isser, the food spoiled. And when he's describing sheloh k'derech ha'achila, he says in this kind of sheloh k'derech ha'achila, I mean the one that it's not the way you eat it, he says it's irev Davar. Okay, so as if they're different. One's spoiled and one has something foul tasting inside of it. Now, why is that important? That doesn't seem to be that should be important. In other words, you can have food that's nifsal mei'achilah because you're Davar. You can have food that's sheloh k'derech ha'achila, I guess by spoiling also, that's for sure. But something can be nifsal mei'achilah by adding a Davar to it also. Why is he splitting it as if nifsal mei'achilah has to be Nisrach, has to spoil, has to rot, and sheloh k'derech ha'achila would be if you irev b'davar. That doesn't seem to be critical to what's going on over here. You can make something not roy la'achila by adding poison to it also. What's the difference? So why should that be the nafkamina between them? Okay, so
Is it true? What do you think? I mean, maybe you would feel like you could express it differently. But is that correct? Could you put in something Davar and it would not be nifsal, but it would be sheloh k'derech ha'achila? Do you hear what
that it would be if you put in something bad tasting, then it'll be sheloh k'derech, of course. Why can't it be sheloh k'derech achilah?
And not rise to the level of...
Right. I mean, there's a line. I mean, at a certain point, it's not k'derech achilah. At one point, it's completely inedible. But the more is that why is it in order to be inedible, it has to be nisrach, that's the spoil. Why? It could be irev davar to make it not edible also. And the nisrach is not the only way to become not edible. It could be not edible by adding something else into it also, you know? And I'm now going to explain to you what I think is pshat in the Chavos Da'as, but I'm not at all convinced that everyone agrees with the Chavos Da'as. Okay, the first part of the Chavos Da'as is pretty straightforward, and I think everybody agrees to that. The second part is not as clear that that's really what everybody agrees to. And you'll hear the raya that maybe other people don't agree to. And that was like this. But to explain the Chavos Da'as, like this. when you take a food and you make it Nifsal mei'achilah by irev by Davar, then in a way it's always reversible. What you just did is always reversible. And the reason why it's always reversible is because you put in a certain amount of Davar into the food to make it not edible. You made a certain amount. But if you add on more of the good part, then you'll dilute it to the point that it makes no difference. Okay, I'll give you an example. Okay, this is totally made up. Okay, let's say that 5 parts per million of gasoline in apple juice makes it not royal achilah. Okay, no, I'm sorry, 6 parts per million makes it not royal achilah. 5 parts is still royal achilah, and 6 parts is inedible. Okay, that's a totally made up thing. Just for an example. Okay, that's the cutoff. 5 is edible and 6 is not edible. Okay, so now. If you have 10 gallons of apple juice, okay, as per our friends at Google, there are 75,708.2 drops in a gallon. Okay, I don't know who measured it. Okay, so somebody
decide what a drop is.
Right, it's not relevant for our point over here. Okay, so if you have 10 gallons, you have about 750,000 drops. Okay, just believe. Okay, there's about 750,000 drops of apple juice in there. And the person puts into that 5 drops of gasoline. Okay? 5 drops of gasoline in those 10 gallons of apple juice will be 6.6 parts per million. Okay? You can do the math later. Okay? 6.6 parts per million. So I just told you that at 6 parts per million is not edible, so this apple juice is not edible. Okay? What happens if we put in another 10 gallons of apple juice? Okay? We take this mixture, we add in another 10 gallons of apple juice into it. Now, instead of being 6.6 parts per million, now it's 3.3. So in Cain, it's back to being royal achilah. So that's just an example to show you that when you're irev by Davar, it's always reversible by adding more of the pleasant tasting food. Okay, it's automatic.
It's very nice you do it with the liquids. You see the dilutions, but I can tell you some solid foods. I put in some bitrex. You can spend the rest of your life. I don't think you'll get it back to being edible.
Why? Because bitrex is only. Well, we'll talk about bitrex at the end. But bitrex is only at a certain amount. If you put any enough,
take a carrot. I put a bitch in a solution, I cook it up in a solution, and it gets trapped inside the carrot. How are you going to exactly make it?
Okay, that's a good point. I'm not sure. If we cook it into like that, okay, I know if I can answer that.
It's any solid food, really. You can't it's trapped in the thing. You can't get it out of there without destroying the thing.
Okay, so maybe that's a good point. So maybe I'm wrong then. Okay, this is my thinking about it like this. If a piece of bread gets rots, okay, or a piece of meat gets spoiled, then even though I could make it edible, I mean, I could pour ketchup all over it to the point that I can actually eat it, but it's obvious that I'm not changing the food at all. I'm not reversing what I did. The food is still inedible. I covered it with ketchup, and therefore I'm able to get it down. Okay, but at least I thought in liquids, okay, maybe you're right, maybe in solids it doesn't work, but at least in liquids, it's reversible. At least at times it's reversible by just adding more hectare. Okay, maybe that's why to be inedible, he said, you have to be, it has to be Nisrach rather than irev by Davar. Okay, now, but the question on this part of the Chavos Da'as that you have to be about irev by Davar is that if we turn to Hilchos Pesach, we'll remember that the Chavos Da'as told us that for Pesach, for chametz to be mutter, it has to be Nifsal mei'achilah. Sheloh k'derech achilah is not good enough. Because or else the Bal Yirah stays around until it becomes Nifsal mei'achilah. Sheloh k'derech it has to do with eating it. But Bal Yirah you're going to be over no matter what. You turn to Hilchos Pesach, and there it tells us that you're not over. It gives 2 examples that you're not over on Bal Yirah. One is tanning solution, some kind of solution for tanning leather that has flour inside of it, and the other one is ink that has beer inside of it. Well, I don't know, crazy, whatever. They put beer into the ink. So in both of those cases, it's considered. you're not erving by your because it's not edible, because tanning solution and ink are both not edible. Okay, those are both in Hilchos Pesach. It's not erving by your. So those are both examples of irev Davar. Okay, now there's chametz here. the beer or the flour was perfectly edible until you mix it into this other thing. So why over there is that if the Chavos Da'as is right that irev Davar doesn't be considered to be Nifsal mei'achilah, so what happened over there? What's the reason why it's Nifsal mei'achilah in that case? So but before I tell you my answer, I'm going to give you an answer for the Chavos Da'as. But nobody talks about it over there as if there's something wrong with that case, which makes me feel like no one except for this Chavos Da'as, no one else says that you need to have Nisrach as opposed to irev Davar. That's the Chavos Da'as is chiddush. The first part of the Chavos Da'as is more straightforward. This part is like, it's chiddush. And here we have in Hilchos Pesach an example of irev Davar, and it is considered Nisrach. So the answer I would give for the Chavos Da'as, again, of course, that's what that din is. That when sheloh derech.
Yeah.
So for Pesach, sheloh derech means you're not erving isser of eating it, but you're still erving by your. I mean, because you didn't do anything wrong. If you did a sheloh derech, you're not erving any isser, but by your you would be erving. That's that's an application. But there it says you're not even by your for only this ink or the tanning solution. It's against us when we tell people about taking medicines. When we talk about the eating part of it, sheloh derech can make it mutter to eat it, but the bayirah part you'd still be over on. Okay, bayirah is less serious than eating, so there could be a difference. You could be allowed to eat a sheloh derech, and don't worry so much about the bayirah; it's less serious of an issue. Okay, now so the answer for the Chavos Da'as is, which is going to be relevant to us.
So you just said pshat irev Davar, and that makes it now schwer. If I said a different shot, like if you put it in enough Davar, the Chavos Da'as would agree that.
So you think the Chavos Da'as didn't mean it? You could say that the Chavos Da'as.
But he said, but even Davar, he meant a little bit of Davar. But if you put basically it's ink and you put a little beer in.
So you're saying is that maybe in the Chavos Da'as Nisrach that was just a way of saying it. He could have irev Davar usually just makes it sheloh derech. Okay, so in which case then the Chavos Da'as himself doesn't even hold of it. I mean, even the Chavos Da'as agrees that if you're irev Davar to the point that it's like, so then you're not answering the kasha, but you're basically saying the Chavos Da'as didn't say what he said, which is fine. I'm okay with that.
He didn't say that irev Davar,
Masking. So you
irreversible and therefore never.
Yes, you could say that. Yes, you could say that. You could. So then there's no one holds such a shita. Okay, I'm saying even though he uses those words, he doesn't really mean it. He's just giving an example. That's just what you could say that. Yes. Okay, so I thought the difference was the answer for the Chavos Da'as for these cases is the nafkamina is that when the Chavos Da'as is talking about when you irev Davar, basically it's isser. We had basically it's heter, it's our apple juice, and we added a little bit of isser into it. As opposed to in the case in Hilchos Pesach, the thing is basically heter. The thing that the tanning solution is not chametz, and ink is not chametz, and you have a little bit of chametz mixed into it, a little flour or a little beer into it. So we make a decision, what is this thing? So, like as if we use the rive. The main thing the ingredient that's here is apple juice. So this is heter. The main ingredient of it, in our case, the apple juice was isser. The tanning solution is heter. So a little bit of isser could be bottled into that thing. If it's mainly isser, then irev Davar maybe would make it. Okay, now. So now go back to our boiler. Okay, we want to add something to the hot water to make it that it should be make it pogem. So if you would agree to if you hold like the Chavos Da'as that irev Davar can't make it Nifsal mei'achilah, then in this case, what are we adding? Tiny bits. It's exactly what we're doing. We're being irev Davar. We're adding something into it that's going to make it foul tasting, and that's going to make it Nifsal mei'achilah. I'm going to get to sheloh derech in a second. I'm going to get to hapogem in a second. Put that on the side. Right now, it's just about the Nifsal mei'achilah. So if I'm going to add in something, if the Chavos Da'as was right, or the way I was reading it, that the Chavos Da'as was right, that irev Davar cannot make it Nifsal mei'achilah, then in our boiler we can't make it Nifsal mei'achilah. Again, I'm going to get to whether it's Nosein hapogem in a second. Put Nosein hapogem on the side. Can we make it Nifsal mei'achilah? So you say, no, because you're just irev Davar. Irev Davar doesn't work for making it Nifsal mei'achilah. Okay? So if you want to use it, just fine. Okay, well, he doesn't hold, there's no such thing. We can make it bad enough. Make it bad enough. I put it in enough. Then it'll be Nifsal mei'achilah. Okay? That's what you're saying. Okay, and I think that most people would agree with that who wouldn't agree with what I thought was the Chavos Da'as. And they hold that, what's the difference? Nifsal mei'achilah is Nifsal mei'achilah. Okay, now, however, there's a problem. because I told you that when the din of Nifsal mei'achilah, there's an exception, so to speak. You only consider Nifsal mei'achilah if it's not reversible. Okay? If what you did is not reversible. But if what you made it Nifsal is reversible, that's not considered Nifsal mei'achilah. So, well, but that's exactly what a boiler is. Because, as you may know, in a boiler, we put all kinds of chemicals into the boiler. Almost none of them pass through into the steam. So basically, you put this bad tasting thing into this liquid, and right now it's Nifsal mei'achilah. Right now the water in the boiler is so bad that it's Nifsal mei'achilah. But it's sitting in a machine that in 30 seconds from now will take out all that iser. Because in 30 seconds from now it's going to make the water boil out, and it will not be Nifsal mei'achilah anymore. It'll be perfectly, such good steam that they do direct steam injection. They put the steam right into my food. Okay, no one cares about any taste carrying over into it. So you can't, how can you say that it's Nifsal mei'achilah? That it's Nifsal mei'achilah because...
They actually don't.
What?
They actually don't.
They don't what?
They don't use direct steam injection on stuff with bad stuff in there.
Of course you do. Every boiler has chemicals in it. Everybody has to boil chemicals. I'm not talking about if you put bitrex. But put bitrex on the side. Every boiler has loads of chemicals inside of it. That tastes
awful. The water producing culinary steam is not the same boiler water that they use to put the chemicals in. The stuff to put chemicals in is used, for indirect.
I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. I don't mean they're not careful. I don't mean they don't do anything differently. But there's definitely chemicals in every boiler. Okay, and the stuff is awful tasting stuff, but they don't worry about it because they know it's not going to get out of the boiler. It's not volatile. It doesn't pop out. Doesn't get out of the boiler. So if we're putting in chemicals that we know are not going to get out, that they're making it awful tasting over here, but they're going to not pass through into the steam. So then it's in a machine which is going to reverse it. It's not maybe theoretically you can reverse it. That's where it is. It's in the boiler. Okay, so I don't hear the Nifsal mei'achilah being such a great side over here. But I said, that's all for Nifsal mei'achilah. But where we started was Nosein lifgam, and it gives a bad taste. Then that's good enough. It doesn't have to be Nifsal mei'achilah to be mutter. It just has to give a negative taste into the thing. Okay, so, but there we have the same kind of a problem. If the steam, if the vapor that comes out of the boiler doesn't taste bad, then how can we say it's Nosein lifgam? How are we going to say that the time of this steam is lifgam into my ketchup when it doesn't taste bad? It tastes like plain water. There's no tam lifgam over here. Okay, so that seems to be tell us that it's not really Nosein lifgam either. Okay, but the other side of that is a well-known logic, which is, let's try to make sense of it here. We're saying that the boiler, all this horrible tasting stuff they put into the boiler does not pass through into the steam because it's not volatile and it doesn't pass into the water. The steam is perfectly clean. It tastes like great water. It tastes like perfect. But we think that the iser tastes like that. The iser that nobody tastes. We think the Blios from the bacon, the other side of the plate, is getting into the steam, which no one tastes. But that does not pass. That does pass into the steam. We have to be able to say this really unusual thing. We're saying is that the time that we don't taste, the bacon that's on the other side of the factory that we don't taste, in the water, that passes through the boiler and keeps on going. But the bitrex to the floor, right, that you can't eat for a week afterwards, everything tastes awful, that does get filtered out by the boiler and doesn't make it pass through. So it's like what do you want from my life? You know what I mean? How can you say that? We could say is we don't taste things so sensitively. So okay, guys, so I'm not tasting it, then the iser is also passing, then the Pegimah is also passing through. You say no, the Pegimah doesn't pass through. Okay, the Pegimah doesn't pass through. Then why do you think the bacon does pass through? It's like you can't have it both ways. So it seems like hard to justify being machmir on this side, be make on the other side. Okay, it's not. I'm not being completely fair. A little bit. The other argument is that iser, Blios, and iser, that's siman tzadi beis, that iser passes through, and that we have to assume that there's tam in there. Those are like dinim. So you open up a Shulchan Aruch, it says there's a din there. Nosein lifgam is a practical thing. Is it Nosein lifgam or is it not? And it's not. Of course, it's not Nosein lifgam because we all taste it. Not. I'm not sure. Okay. So in practice, there are three different ways hashgachas take this. So I told you I was going to leave you hanging. You're about to be, okay. And that's like this. The three ways. Some hashgachas, the most lenient way of looking at it is, if the water is ever Nosein lifgam, then at any point in the process, at some point in the boiler, the whole steam system, it's Nosein lifgam, then you don't have to worry about this steam passing on time. In other words, if the Nosein lifgam part of it gets filtered out by the boiler, so when it turns into steam, and so does the iser, and you don't have to worry about it. That's the most common. Middle shita is also what cooler is. I don't know whether if Nosein lifgam is good enough, but make it Nifsal mei'achilah, make the water in the boiler Nifsal mei'achilah, and at that point, remember, Chavos Da'as says, once it's Nifsal mei'achilah, it's over, it's completely heter at that point, so make it Nifsal mei'achilah, and then I'll be happy. And then you don't have to worry about the time passing on. It's reversible, okay, we'll close our eyes to it being reversible, and so, but as long as it's Nifsal, not just Nosein lifgam, it has to be Nifsal mei'achilah. If it's Nifsal mei'achilah in the boiler, then it's good. Okay, both of these two ways of looking at it are coolers, of course, but they're also sort of in the background is what we spoke about last time, which is we don't see any Blios in the steam anyhow. Remember we talked about this, that like in practice no one sees it. So we're choosing to be machmir and say that it says in Simon Tzadi that Blia passes through, and we have to assume that there's time there. But in practice no one ever sees it. So it's sort of like colors are looking at it and say, okay, so if we made it Nifsal mei'achilah, we made it Nosein lifgam, that'll be good enough. Okay. And the last shita, the most strict shita, is the water does not have any pegimah in it. It's not Nifsal lifgam. It's not Nifsal mei'achilah. The steam that passes through is not. The only way to be hapogem the steam system, the only way to make a pegimah in the steam system is to put a Davar hapogem in that transfers through into the steam. That the steam itself will have this pegimah to it, and then it'll be Nosein lifgam into the food, and then we know it's Nosein lifgam. Don't worry about Blios that are in there. The bacon that are in there is Nosein lifgam because we pass it through like that. Okay, so that's the most strict way of looking at it. What do? We haven't got there yet. That's why I thought I'm leaving you hanging. Now, in practice, is a little bit, aside, of course, the difference of how hapogem has to be or what to use. As far as tasting, there's a nafkamina between these shittas. The first and second way, which it has to be sheloh, it has to be Nifsal mei'achilah or it has to be Nifsal mei'achilah or it has to be Nosein lifgam. They would taste the water in the boiler in the sampling station, not in the other parts of the boiler, but basically they would be tasting the water any place. And at some point in the system, that would be in the boiler, you could taste the water as being Nosein lifgam or Nifsal mei'achilah, then that's good enough. If you want to say that it has to carry into the steam, then don't taste it in the boiler, because that's where all the chemicals are. You have to taste it at the kettle or in the condensate return tank in a place where it's already turned into steam and see if the pegimah actually passed through. Okay. Now, just to wind down, I'm going to tell you sort of 4 different ways that people have tried to be hapogem steam systems. None of them would work very well. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry. Let me take that back. Okay. We'll see whether they worked or not. Okay. The first one was that there's a long time ago someone came up with, I believe it came from Eretz they could use something called pine oil. Pine oil, which seems as the big advantage it has was that it boiled at the same temperatures, was similar to water. So it was great. They put it into the boiler and it carried into the steam, which is what we want. It gets carried into the steam. It satisfies everybody's needs.
It's true. It's really true. You couldn't distill the pine oil out of the water?
If you did fancy machinery, maybe. But in a boiler, it worked. Okay? Maybe there are ways to distill, but basically it worked. The problem was that it was so volatile. I mean, it got out into the air that the people in the plant, it would irritate their eyes. Okay? People in the factories that had that were using pine oil, it would irritate them, because I guess steam leaking in the plant would irritate them. Plus, it would do horrors to the boiler itself. Okay? It would gunk up the boilers, it seems. And yeah, once the rabbis left and the plumbers found out about this, they got rid of it. Okay, they said, forget it, no, we won't let it. Okay. Now another thing that's hapogem, this we did taste first. Shachta tasted this, and then years later, Rav Rees and Rabbi Friedman, when he was still here, tasted this propylene glycol with water, and they came up all of them with this idea that at 15% concentration, that's considered hapogem. And so that's fine for hot water systems, like in hot water loops, people use that. It doesn't work in a steam system. It would mess up the steam transfer. You can't use it in the steam system, and it also doesn't pass into the steam, but it would mess up this boiler. The boiler wouldn't work right at that temperatures. But in hot water loops, people do use it. Okay, now there's another thing that was very promising, I don't know if it's practical, and that was something called neutralizing amines. Okay, amines are what it is what this came from is that I turned to someone who works in boilers and said to them, this is what we need. We want a Davar hapogem that's going to pass into the steam. Okay, what could you suggest? So I said, neutralizing amines, of course. I said, yeah, of course. What are neutralizing amines? And that is that they said that most of the chemicals that go in a boiler are to protect the boiler. There are all kinds of things that they prevent, all kinds of things that are going on in the boiler that it's to protect the boiler. But there's this group of things called neutralizing amines is not to protect the boiler, but to protect parts of the equipment further down the line, that some systems needed further down the line. So they bedafka have to transfer into the steam, because they're not meant for the boiler, they're meant for the other parts of the steam system. And they have to transfer into the steam, and they taste bad also. So no problem, wonderful, it's a great deal. They're meant for the rest of the steam, they are meant to transfer into the steam, but they don't, and so that should be good. The only problem was that it took a really lot of it in order to be pogem. Okay, in other words, they didn't have such bad taste, and it would be like really, really expensive to use them. I mean, you have to use so much of it, and they're expensive that to get enough to be Nosein lifgam into the, if you want to carry into the steam, that would be pretty awful.
Was that just an expensive on like on a regular, constant basis? But let's say for a one-time company want to make a production, you just need, okay,
okay, that's an idea. You're saying maybe if you just need to use it sometimes, you can get away.
It's kosher once every 2 months in this.
Okay, yes, so it's a good idea. So you're saying we should pursue it for that. It plots, the idea plots because it was going to be so expensive, it wasn't worth it. You're saying, but maybe for the right person in the right situation, he'll say, yeah, I need it for a week, I need to do it. Okay, it's worth thinking about that. Okay, now, the other one that Yossi mentioned already, which is well known as bitrex. Okay, bitrex is this denatonium benzoate, which is supposed to be the most bitter stuff in the world. Okay, that's what they promote it as. So what happened is about 9 years ago, somebody who sells bitrex in America, like the people who distribute it in the whole United States, came to speak for ACO to tell everybody about how to use it for Pegimah. But he told the truth. Okay, which is he works with it. He knows the stuff. So he says like this. He says, hapogem, yes. He says at 0.05 parts per million, you could already notice it. And at 2 parts per million, you can't, it would be repugnant, his word to her. And at 10 parts per million, it's completely intolerable. Okay, in tiny amounts. So it's really knock you off. He says the problem is that basically it doesn't transfer into steam. Okay, he said it doesn't transfer into steam. He says you could put in monstrous amounts of it and it would transfer into steam, which probably make him happy because he'd sell you a lot of it, but you couldn't afford that. He says, well, there's another thing you could do is if you have steam, when steam comes out of the boiler, it goes into the main big pipe. It's called the header. Okay, the main pipe is called the header. You could drip it into the header. Okay, you could drip it into there, and then it would sort of get carried along by the steam. Okay, you wouldn't try to get it to boil out of the boiler. You spray it into there. He says you could potentially do that. He thought that would be pretty expensive also, how much you have to do into there. He says so it's good for hot water system because it doesn't boil till 238 Fahrenheit. So it would say fine in a hot water system. Use very little of it because just a few parts per million is enough to be pogem. I think usually we assume 5 parts per million is counted as pogem. But for a steam system, he was like, no, it's not going to work for a steam system. Okay, now, if you hold, like one of the first 2 opinions, that you just have to make the water Nifsal mei'achilah or Nosein lifgam in the boiler, then it's fine. Drip it into the boiler, it'll stay in the boiler, and it'll do that. But if you're trying to get it to carry into the steam, he said that will not work. Okay, 2 more things. That some distillation columns or reactors or all kinds of things don't heat with steam. Instead of heating with steam, they heat with hot oil. That's because steam can only get so hot, and oil can get even hotter. So they fill this jacket with oil. But derech klal, that oil is mineral oil, which is not mei'achilah, or other things that are similar. So I guess you should taste it if you really want to know. But derech klal, those are not a problem. Steam systems and hot water systems are a problem. Usually there's no bleed because those are automatically Nosein lifgam. The thing itself is not mei'achilah or Nosein lifgam. And last is, I have to mention, is that even a tiny amount, like a 0.5% of caustic is pogem. Okay, it's pretty awful tasting. I have no idea if you use. I can't imagine you use it in a boiler, but people use it in a hot water system. But I'm only mentioning it to tell you that you shouldn't taste it. Okay, everything else you could taste it. The mashgiach has to taste it, see if it works or not. But caustic literally can burn a person's tongue. Okay, no, it's not a joke. It's like really serious. So there are ways to test it with a pH meter. You could test how much caustic is in something. There are meters that could test it. But as opposed to the other thing, you want to test bitrex and not be able to eat for a week, that's fine. That's your business. But if you want it, you should not taste something that has caustic.
0.5%, what's the percent they use for cleaning? Do you know,
like 0.5%. Like that's like a normal amount, like a 0.5%. Yeah, 0.5% or 1%, I forgot what it is, but tiny amounts, really small amounts, and that's pogem. It's pogem. But you should not, what?
Less than 0.5%? Or?
That's my impression. Half is what you're supposed to use. I might be wrong. But you need to test it with a machine and not with your tongue. Okay, that's it.